Freud once said that this is precisely the risk modern man faces. He may wake up one day and realize he has wasted half of his life. Therapeutic medications have become one of the most common forms of treatment for anxiety disorders and depression. However, these drugs are not very effective at curing people and often merely become crutches for those with lifelong psychological disabilities. Fortunately, there are alternative ways to treat anxiety and depression. In this video, we will turn to Sigmund Freud, one of history's greatest psychiatrists, for medication-free advice on how to find a cure for these psychological disorders. Freud stated in his work Civilization and Its Discontents that governments and medical establishments still cling firmly to the idea that anxiety disorders and depression originate from alterations within the brain. Unfortunately, many common doctors still advocate this to the detriment of their patients, whom they mass-produce. Almost all these patients have been convinced by medical dogma that their illness is physical in nature. Freud believed that most cases of anxiety and depression are not the product of a defective brain but of a defective lifestyle. The first step in Freud's treatment method, therefore, was not a prescription of medications but a dose of psychological knowledge about what to expect from life and understanding what is needed to change. Regarding the former, Freud pointed out that many people believe life should be easy, that suffering should be minimal, and difficulties should always be avoided. However, Freud was direct with his patients, telling them that life is not easy, and comfort and peace are not our natural state. As he wrote, it is ultimately very unlikely that there can exist a therapy that eliminates all difficulties. The human being needs difficulties, they are necessary for health. What concerns us here is only an excessive amount of them. Accepting that difficulties are inevitable and that nothing worthwhile is easy places us on the firm ground of reality from which we can change. Because when we accept that life is difficult, we also realize that only through a strengthened character do we have any chance of leading a good life. On the other hand, if we remain trapped in the illusion that life should be easy, we will be less motivated to overcome a weak character since we will falsely expect that if we simply give it time, life will become easier. As Freud wrote in The Future of an Illusion, life is a battlefield, it always has been and always will be, and if it were not, existence would come to an end. There is another piece of psychological understanding that Freud considered crucial for his patients to understand. Our problems exist in the present, and current problems are not solved by digging into our past. Many people like to believe that only when they have determined why they are the way they are can they move forward in life. However, Freud believed that fixation on the past was a defense mechanism used to avoid the difficult task of facing what must be done now. He recognized that neurotic individuals often use the unconscious to block painful realizations about themselves and their behaviors. As Freud explained, people should know that not only the neurotic but everyone naturally prefers never to look for the causes of any inconvenience in themselves but to push them as far away from themselves as possible in space and time. Otherwise, one would run the risk of having to make a change for the better. Compared to this hateful risk, it seems infinitely more advantageous to blame someone else. With these doses of psychological understanding, Freud would move to the first practical step in his treatment method, which was helping his patients face what he called the unconscious, or as he wrote, the first requirement of any radical psychological method is that consciousness confronts its unconscious. The unconscious, in Freud's terminology, includes the elements of our character that we repress and push away from conscious awareness due to shame, insecurity, or censorship. It is, in other words, the side of our personality that we wish to hide both from others and from ourselves. There is no doubt that human beings are generally less good than they imagine themselves to be or wish to be. As Freud explained, we all harbor repressed impulses and drives, and the less these are embodied in the conscious life of the individual, the darker and denser they will be. Freud believed that facing the unconscious was crucial in the process of personal change for several reasons. First, we do ourselves no favors by denying the lower parts of our personality. We simply lose control of how and when these traits appear. On the other hand, if we recognize a character flaw, we can learn to control its expression and thus minimize the damage it causes in our life. Or as Freud explains, anything conscious can be corrected, but anything that escapes into the unconscious is beyond the reach of correction and, with its uncontrolled growth, is subject to increasing degeneration. Thank God, nature ensures that unconscious contents break into consciousness sooner or later. The unconscious is not only composed of weaknesses, some of its elements are strengths that we repressed in our youth because our peers, family members, or society in general gave us the false impression that these traits were bad. Some people, for example, repress the ability to express anger or the ability to defend themselves. Another benefit of becoming aware of the unconscious, therefore, is that we gain access to character traits that promote life. Or as Freud writes, the unconscious is simply something inferior, primitive, unadapted, and clumsy, not wholly bad. It even contains qualities that would somehow vitalize and embellish human existence. One way to become aware of the unconscious is to observe the weaknesses, flaws, and insecurities of people close to us. Because not only do most of us repress similar character traits, but we also tend to project elements of our unconscious onto other people. If, therefore, we pay attention to what character traits of our friends and family members bother us, we can also glimpse our own unconscious. In addition to observing others, another way to bring the unconscious to the light of consciousness is to reflect on the motives for our actions, especially those we are ashamed of, and to be open to self-criticism when necessary. Because as Freud points out, often the only thing that prevents us from seeing our unconscious is the ability to be honest with ourselves. Along with becoming more aware of the unconscious, another fundamental aspect of Freud's treatment method was helping his patients find meaning in their lives. Freud believed that when one is trapped in deep depression or consumed by an anxiety disorder, to be cured, it is necessary to discover a role as one of the participants in the drama of civilization. To understand what he meant by this, we can turn to Freud's observations about the constraints of society and the individual's struggle within it. Freud believed in the power of sublimation, the process by which primitive impulses are channeled into socially acceptable activities like art, scientific inquiry, or productive work. In Civilization and Its Discontents, Freud emphasized that people in modern society suffer precisely because they lack the meaningful structures that would allow them to sublimate their primitive drives productively. Modern society offers freedom but removes the certainty of purpose that older cultural traditions provided. Freud points to the example of a Western woman he had the opportunity to meet. In Freud's words, this woman had a compulsive habit of traveling, always on the move from one place to another, constantly searching for something, although she never truly managed to find what she was looking for. I was struck when I looked into her eyes, the eyes of a haunted, cornered animal, always searching, hoping for something. She is possessed. The question is, and why is she possessed? Because she does not live a life that has meaning. Hers is a completely, grotesquely banal life without any meaning at all. If she dies today, nothing has happened, nothing has disappeared because, quite simply, her existence meant nothing. This compulsive searching infects many in the Western world. Some run from one destination to another, some pursue romantic partners, others are compulsive seekers of money, prestige, fame, or recognition on social media. But whatever external form it takes, the underlying motivation is the same. The seeker is trying to flee from the banality of their existence. They are seeking to fill the void of emptiness that comes from living a life without meaning. But as Freud explains, this void cannot be filled with things or even with experiences. What fills this void is knowing that we are living in a way that makes a difference. Or as he writes in relation to the woman he met, however, if she had the ability to express, I consider myself descended from the great cultural tradition of mankind. Every day I have the responsibility to assist in the advancement of civilization that would present a completely different perspective. In that case, her existence would come to life, acquire meaning both in its constancy and for humanity as a whole. That provides peace. When people feel they are living as actors in the drama of civilization, that provides the only meaning a human life can have. Everything else is banal and can be dismissed, a career, the procreation of children, everything can be compared to that one thing, having a life with meaning. Freud was not suggesting that we all adopt the same cultural patterns or sublimations. Rather, his point is that it is logical that many people suffer. This suffering is simply due to the fact that they have a life that lacks meaning. And the task for those who want to free themselves from anxiety or depression is to discover this meaning. We must, in other words, find a way to justify our existence so that we, like those who live within rich cultural traditions, can believe that our life has meaning. For some, this can be achieved through creative activity, for others by contributing substantially to the promotion of values such as justice, freedom, or community, while others will find it through intellectual pursuits. But for those of us in the modern Western world, it is up to us and only us to discover how we can play a meaningful role in the drama of civilization. For the few who accomplish this task, a full life will define their future, while for the many who do not, years or decades of meaningless suffering and compulsive searching will, unfortunately, be their fate. As Freud wrote, my only concern lies in ensuring the achievement of what is within each person. That is the central issue. Therein lies the essential question of authentic civilization.